Welcome back, everyone, to the How We Roll Gaming podcast. Now, this episode won't be posted for a couple of weeks from right now, but we're recording just a couple of days before Christmas. So I hope the two of you are ready. Are you guys doing any? Do you have any gaming related plans over the holiday weeks?
Uh,
Uh,
as of right now, I might have some guests over later, and we might play some board games. And in general, I've been playing the newest Star Wars video game out currently, Star Wars Outlaws, and having a good time with it.
Sweet. I need to play some more of that.
for me, it's mostly not playing games, but just thinking up the how the adventures are going to go for new games, and then for my current games, and then I'm gonna think about the scenario and setting for a new game I want to do in the future.
Sweet. I want to get some more Outlaws played. I totally don't know that my son has gotten me the Indiana Jones and the Great Circle game for Christmas. I totally don't know that because I totally am not the one who suggested it and found it in stock at a nearby Target and set up the order for him to place for delivery. And I'm not the one who got it off of the porch when it was delivered. Uh, but I may also, I'm hoping to have some time to sit down and read the Arkham Horror Core rulebook and the Star Trek Adventures Second Edition Core rulebook. Although, going to have family in town for the holidays, so who knows if I'm actually going to have that time. So, hopefully, knock wood.
Hmm.
But you know, there's never I've got a week and a half off of work, but there's never enough time, no matter how much time you take off work, to do everything that you plan in the time that you take off of work. It always goes by so fast. But what are we going to be talking about today, guys?
Well, it's one that's definitely related to me specifically. It's the transitioning from a player to a GM.
Yes. Yes, we all know about the Forever GM.
It's a tale as old as time.
um, but a lot of really good GMs begin as players. So today we're going to talk about making that transition from player to GM, what it entails, what might spur somebody to make that move. Because some people just want to play, some people just want to GM, but sometimes you start off as a player and like, hey, I want to try that. We're going to give some ideas on how to make that switch and anything else we can think of on the topic. And it just so happens that among the three of us, Robert has most recently made that move behind the screen.
Yes, definitely. I think it was been about, what is it, 1 year, 2 years since I've transitioned.
I
I'd say
think it's
roughly a year and a half.
That sounds right. Yeah, a year and a
it,
half.
it sounds that sounds about right because I remember you sitting down with us as we were starting to brainstorm um, our adaptation of the Far Orbit project,
Yes.
and we're giving you hints
Because you had
on
some
making
questions
that
as well.
transition.
Yeah, and definitely. I went to you guys for advice because you have been in the GM scene a lot longer than I ever have. So I
Well,
definitely picked you guys' brains to see if I was doing it right or setting it up right.
well, I know that I kind of dove into the deep end of GMing. I'd played one or two sessions of D&D proper way, way, way back. And then in high school, they released the DC Heroes role playing game, and I was a big, oh, I still am a big DC Comics nerd, and the cover art was by my favorite artist, the late George Perez, and so I snatched it up because it was real heavy on Teen Titans material, and he was the artist of New Teen Titans at the time, and so I dove into that. I convince some friends that we needed to play, but I was the one who owned the game. So I started out as our GM, and fortunately, uh, there were one or two others in the group who were ready and willing to try their hand at GMing too. So we kind of rotate GM duties, and that allowed me to play too, because I had come up with a character idea that I really wanted to play. And ever since then, that's kind of been the case. Every long running game group that I've been a part of, one point or another, I've GM'd in the system as well as playing. How about you, Nick? What's your history with GMing versus playing?
Similar to yours, we had a GM at this when I was homeschooled that we went to for like get-togethers, and he sort of took us around to like different types of games, mainly like old school, like a D&D, obviously, but also like the Star Wars role playing game when it was owned by Wizards of the Coast, both the Saga and D20 edition, and sort of got me into that. And then I kept on collecting stuff and be like, oh, this stuff is. Remember, it was fun when I got into high school out of homeschool, or like that was my middle and late elementary years. So I was like, I got together a group of friends and was like, hey, you guys ever heard of this? And you ever tried it? I was like, guess I'll put it on for them. And then I was the DM for them for a while.
Yeah, I know that feeling well. You find a system that you like and you keep buying the stuff, and so since you're the one with all of the books, you kind of by default become the GM
Yeah, it's
because
like
you've
I
got
have the
all of the books.
material. I've got the material, so I can more easily put it together.
And then what made you decide to make that jump to GM, Robert?
Well, I can tell you in the beginning, back when I joined Nick's group back during COVID, is that I had always wanted to join a D&D group or some type of RPG group, but where I live, that wasn't really a big scene. Like there was no group in high school, no group in college that I ever found, so it was always something I wanted to do in the back of my mind, but never had the chance to. So when I joined with Nick's group, it was a great experience. I got to make my own character, got to kind of use the creative juices that's always been in the back of my head. Like, okay, who is this character? What's his goals? How would he act in this scenario? What would he feel? And then over time, as I played more and more, especially in Star Wars, because that was our big thing back then, I thought I've always liked Star Wars. I've always liked these times, at least in the legends. Like I said, I really like the Warlord era, the Thrawn era,
Yeah,
the stuff like that. And I've always like it's always a bummer to me that they've never made anything about that era into an actual like media. Sure, there are books, but there's no show, there's no movie. Well, back then there was no shows like that. So I was like,
yeah.
I want to do that. And I'll admit, like, the first part of me was like, maybe I can ask Nick if he can maybe make something like that. But then I was like, why am I doing that? I'm just asking Nick to cater to me specifically. So I was like, you know what? I want to try this. I
Because I
know,
wouldn't be
at
opposed
least
to. I have an idea for doing something similar to that
I know. It's just back
in the
then
future.
you were doing all these other Star Wars games. So,
Yeah,
like, adding
at the
another
moment, yeah,
one would just be way too much for you. So I was like, you know what? I know the setting. I know Star Wars, at least the ins and outs of Star Wars, kind of how it works. And I was like, what I'm going to do, I'm going to get some books, look it up, and I'm going to see if I can't run a game in that era, in that Warlord era of Star Wars. And I was like, and I know these people, so I'm going to just float the idea by them, see if any of them take, and then I'm just going to jump into it, take about a few months to about like few months, and then Nick and Daryl here have already run, so I can make stuff, run it by them, ask, okay, how do you make this world? How do you kind of structure a campaign in such a wide opening sandbox? And then it's like you got to figure out your goal, what you want it to be. Do you have a structured campaign, or is it going to be kind of an open end? ended world where they're just existing, and then you got to think on how your players will act or what characters they'll kind of make, and it helps when you know your players. And then after that, you just have to create the setting, get them invested, and then boom, you've got a campaign. So that was my thought process in the beginning of transitioning.
Yeah, it was fun when you came to us with your idea, with your questions about being a DM, because not every usually it's kind of like the hero's journey, the mentor, because usually, like, from all the people that I can imagine, I think you've probably had this experience too. I've heard that a player becomes a DM because the DM either moves away or passes away,
Yeah, I've heard that
and
before.
someone
Yeah,
needs to take on the passing of the mentor.
yeah,
It's like, so I was worried, like, which one of us was gonna kick the bucket?
I'm even odds. It was even odds. Could have been either of us. Fortunately, Robert wasn't plotting to kill either of us. It was just, adding to the pool.
Yeah,
yeah.
which was always part of the goal when we started up these groups, like, to encourage people to, like, because that's, again, as you mentioned, Robert, like, I tried to start up a group in my college, and, like, my college was nerdy for a college down here,
Yeah, because
and it's like even that was like hard to get traction on.
I was up in A&M, and they're definitely nerdy, but the only thing related to gaming that I found was just a video game creation club that met at A&M. There was nothing in the way of tabletop or board games or stuff like that.
Yeah, I learned the hard way in that I put it on the at the school's Reddit, but the post right under me sort of told me, but because the post right directly under mine that I just posted about, like, starting a D&D group, was, how do you make friends at UTD? Number one top voted comment with 30 at the moment, and I believe it became like 130. You don't.
Mm,
See, I guess I was kind of lucky in that regard with that DC Heroes game back in high school, and that all of my friends were kind of nerdy, and some of them I had gotten into comics, and some of them already kind of were, and we were all the nerdy type anyway. And so I was like, "Hey, I have this game. We should play it." And they're like, "Okay." And and we took off from there. Uh,
And
so
that's
I
ultimate. That ultimately, that is why I started up the meetup groups in the first place. It was like, all right, college is not going well. I tried a few online games, but I'd get people from, like, Germany, and I can't stay up that late. It's like, I'm gonna try and make it local. There's got to be others out me that are either looking for this,
Yeah,
yeah,
and the rest was
and
history.
yep, and you can't get rid of us now.
It's true.
yeah. Because for me, back in high school, I was on the football team, and there was there was by no way, no reason, no there was no like jock type characters, but all my friends or people I knew were the athletic type. So when they wanted
Yeah,
to hang out and do stuff, it was always sports related. And those that weren't on the football team, because I did have a few friends that I just knew from elementary and middle school, they were more video game centered. So there was no one really interested in the
tabletop.
tabletop when I
And
was growing up.
there is a also a stigma of investment that does come from even starting getting into role playing games, which can't be ignored.
Oh yes, there's definitely you do definitely to be a hyperbolic, you've sacrificed your time and money for this to create these worlds, create these games that other you and other people play in.
Yeah, and it's definitely not an insignificant of either.
No.
Right.
So that is something that should be known for anyone that's looking to get into being a game master. It's going to
Yes.
cost time and it's going to cost money.
Yes. And no matter how fun it is, never go into financial problems for this. If you have money
Exactly.
on the side, by all means. But if you're struggling, don't do it. Maybe find someone, read it at the bookstore for hours before
Put
they
together,
kick you
put
out,
together,
and then
put together a group, and we don't advocate finding things online, but we're not saying that we haven't done it before.
I am pure as the driven snow in that regard. um, so, as you started to make that transition, Robert, what was the biggest surprise that you found?
well, there were some things that I had to figure out. First of all, is definitely the anxiety jitters you get when I finally made that first session and everyone was coming to my house and my brain was like, okay, this is real. You've got to get them hooked. You've got to get them in this game and you got to just do it right. And what I didn't expect is that they would like it so much in the beginning. Like they were like, "You sure you've never like?" I think it was either Betsy or Dante. They were like, "Are you sure you've never GM'd before?" And I was like,
I
"Mm."
think it was Betsy because I was there for that first session just sort of because you held it at my place.
And I was like, "No, this is pretty much my first time." And I was unexpected on how quickly they'd like it, how quickly they get invested, how quickly I just dumped a character in our campaign. There's a Gamorrean character named Gruckor. He was completely optional and a little bit behind the screens. I just made the guy up. Just made him up. They were on a prison ship, so I'm like, what would you find on a prison ship in Star Wars? A Gamorrean, why not?
Prisoner, yeah.
And I was like, you know what? I'm gonna throw him in there. He's gonna act like a dumb brute Gamorrean, and they just love the guy. And now he's part of their crew. He's got a big axe, and they love the guy so much that they pushed me to make him a nemesis, so he could take strain instead of just taking wounds all the time. And
Well,
that's
Like
kind of what
one of the
surprised
biggest
me.
things, like I would say about the pre-game jitters, they never really go away. There are
I
times
was
that
I
I'm
was just
like,
about to say that.
No, they don't. But I have noticed they've lessened as the more
yeah,
we do this.
the more you do it, there's never that moment where you feel like I have this 100%.
No,
Yeah.
no, it's
e-
And
always a
the
push
Every
old,
and pull.
every time I launch a new game, I'm like, okay, I hope that this premise, this setup, this setting, and the system that I picked for it, I hope that everybody enjoys it and has fun and wants to keep coming back to play because I'm having fun building it all for them. So I want to keep doing it. So I hope they like it. It that never goes away.
and a part of it does again come both from the investment of, mostly in this case, time, and like I want to share this story with someone, but it's like, and have these characters have fun in this story, this world. It's like you get attached to it in a way. Like,
Oh, very much so. There's been some bad guys that I've made that I knew eventually they're gonna die, and I'm just like, oh, I'm so sad they're gonna go and I can't play them anymore.
And I mean, I even it has been probably clo- I'm going to date myself here. It's probably been close to 30 years since I last played in that first Star Wars campaign that I was part of back in the West End system. And I'm still friends with some of the players from that. And we haven't played any games in ages. And I periodically will find myself thinking, hey, I should reach out to them and see if they're interested in me running a one shot in the FFG system, like catching up with our characters.
Yeah.
But um,
you
you know,
haven't worked a similar feeling. It's like we ended the our group that originally our special missions group couple years back, and it's like I would love to do a one shot where it's like, where's everyone in like the during the time of like the sequel trilogy?
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, exactly, exactly. Um, Now, one thing as I started GMing that I had, it's taking me years to get over this. I used to over prepare like crazy.
I did I still do to a degree, but I've learned to tone it back.
Yeah.
Part of my problem with over preparing was that with 2020 hindsight, and we're talking about me now versus high school me in particular in that DC Heroes campaign. I I railroaded way too much because my way of prep at that time, the only thing that I really knew, um, since we had started off with one or two pre-written adventures, was the printed adventure modules. So slight technical glitch there, but as I was saying, I had a problem with over preparing. And with the DC Heroes system, we were used to playing from the first few sessions in pre written adventure modules. And so, what I would do when I was writing something completely from scratch, I sat down at our computer and I basically typed out an adventure module. It was nowhere near quite as long as what was published, but I used their same format and I used all of that as much as I could on a late 80s computer setup. But I and so it was too railroady in hindsight. I didn't think it at the time, but I would over prepare. I would think, oh, if they do this, then this will happen, and I need to make sure that they go here, and then when after they go here, then they will go over here, and I had to. As time went on, I learned that I had to unlearn that. I'm not writing a module for public consumption that can go any of a million ways because every group is different. I'm putting something together for my group and I know how my players play.
Yes, exactly.
I know the kinds of decisions that they make. I know the kinds of things that will hook them and what they won't care about at all. So let's tailor this to them rather than just writing every beat
And that's
out.
also a major thing. Is like I've heard a lot of people discourse online about like authors and creative writers going into to to being GMs and like loving worlds and concepts, but like having frustration as GMs at tables because it's one thing to build a world and write a narrative in it. It's another to build a world and have real people taking care of these characters in it.
Yes, because
Right.
that's something I specifically had to reconcile with myself. Because another thing you got to learn from transitioning to player to GM is that you also have to reconcile with your ability to control. When you're a player, all you have to control is your character. You know how they think, you know how they act, you know what they're going to do because it's your character. You're the one playing it. As a GM, you make the world, kind of make the structure, the skeleton, as we like to say. But what I had to learn is that while I'm making it, it's not all mine. Because while I can make the NPCs, I can make the worlds, I can make the places, but I can't tell my players how they act as their characters.
Like
It's
the
that
real,
control
yeah,
between GM versus your control when you're a player, and you have to reconcile that while you do have the final say in their decisions, you don't have control over what those decisions will be.
exactly. Like the major like sign of a bad DM is a DM who is all about control.
Yes. It's one of
And
those where in the horror stories, when the best example is when someone has a horror story of a GM playing with a module and they say, "You can't do that. That was not in the module." It's
I
kind
guess
of just translating to like, "You can't do that. That's not how I planned for that to work."
Right. And part of that is why over the years, when I first started GMing, pre-written modules were my crutch.
they can be
And
a good crutch.
they are a great way to learn. Don't get me wrong. There are great pre-written modules out there. But the stronger you get as a GM, I've reached the point that yes, I buy pre-written adventures, but I more often than not at this point use them as idea mines.
Yes, I definitely do that
And
as well.
Yeah, because sometimes
I'll
they'll
go
have
through and
new
I'm like,
mechanics or new ideas on how to use established mechanics.
yeah, and I'll look through and I'm like, okay, I like this story element here, so let me pull this out. I'm not going to run this whole adventure, but I'm going to pull this concept, boom, and pull it over into an adventure for my campaign. And there are times that I'm just pulling stat blocks out of a published adventure, not even the ideas like, oh, I like this character. This character could be fun. I'm going to bring him over here because I have no use for the rest of the adventure.
It's like, "Oh, I like this item or this weapon. I'm gonna take that, but I don't really need the scenario and how they get it. I can get them get it a different way."
There's this unique
Exactly.
location. It's like I like them rules on how the players have to interact here. Let's just paint over the sign that has the name on it, and with one of it fits the location we're going to.
Yeah, because at least in my example with my Star Wars scenario during the Warlord era, I'm like, okay, specifically they're in the region of the galaxy where there's this major Warlord faction. Well, in Star Wars story, that Warlord faction basically gets like steamrolled by the New Republic fleet because their leader was just such an idiot. But I was like, okay, what if he had like one competent commander that was able to keep everything together? So the struggle between getting control of that region is harder, thereby creating more opportunities for my characters. And I was like, okay, I'll do that.
Yeah.
Like one of my earlier longer running games was based off of the starter, and one of my current running games is based off of the starter games for the FFG Star Wars role playing game. Those being what became Long Arm in the Hut game, and this one on a Whisper based game, which have way
Yes,
exceeded and gone beyond the bounds of what they were set out to be. Just quick introductions, full fledged campaigns of
yeah,
characters and ideas that never would have were crossing the minds of the original creators.
yeah. Though I think part of me thinks that those creators did kind of see the potential. That's why they left some of these modules kind of open ended and saying, you can use this as your launching point to a further campaign, or you can leave it here. The choice is yours.
Oh, that's what I'm saying about like pre-written adventure modules have changed as just as much as the game and the systems they do. To very much be
Yeah.
like having like those stat blocks at the end of the book. So if you don't want to take anything from the book, you don't have to thumb through the book itself. You can just take that right at the back page of the appendix, or give you options to like, keep the story going or keep this character
Yes, some books
alive.
even say, okay, this adventure was for like we were thinking these type of characters, these type of roles is what this adventure was initially for. But we have some ways you could incorporate it for a different set of players with different set of roles or different set of abilities, how they could get invested in this, how they would find this, and why they would be invested in this when originally it was just for these type of characters.
Some even have preambles that say like, here's how to adjust it if like say you want to do this at a higher level for these characters.
Yeah, pre-written adventures have changed quite a
Because they
bit.
used
I
to be, as you
if
mentioned, very railroady.
Yeah, and they've gotten much less so some of them can still be railroady. I mean, it's hard to not write and publish something to send out to the masses and not have it be kind of
Yeah.
railroady.
But the advice of
It
like using pre-made, pre-written adventure modules is my rule of thumb is being like, that is the ideal coats like in a session with people that you know would love this. Never approach it that way. Always have a bit of flexibility.
Yeah.
and pre-written adventures also work really well if they're short ones in particular if you're going to be running a game for a group of people that you don't
Yes, that
know
it,
Yes. Very much so.
terribly
or
well.
people that you don't think understand role-playing games very well. They are there
Because
contain stories that that allow the players to explore the world without you having to do a lot of the heavy leg work, while they also don't have to do the heavy leg work. If they can fit archetypes, so both player and GM can kind of feel each other out in this.
and then something else too that a lot of new GMs, I don't think a lot of them necessarily go into with this mentality, but some of them some do kind of have to learn that the GM and player relationship is not an adversarial
Yeah, that's
relationship.
when I had to explain like what I do to some family members. Like, so who wins?
Everyone, because we play and have a good time.
Because the
Yeah.
idea is this is not a it's a tabletop game, but it's not a tabletop game in terms of there's a winner or a
Yeah.
loser. This is
It's
more
not
of
a
a
me versus
collaborative.
them.
It's a collaborative storytelling event with a rules arbitrator.
Yeah, and that's another thing you just got to
Yeah,
make sure you're not what we like to call a combative DM. You're not trying to be like, okay, it's me versus the players. Let's see who wins.
and not every player necessarily makes for a good GM because they might fall into that adversarial mindset.
Yes.
Um, Nick and I have had an experience with someone who was a great player. He is an amazing player.
Brilliant.
He
It knows
knows,
the rules inside and out. Even has accredited as a tester on some of the books.
and he is brilliant at thinking outside of the box, at applying the mechanics as they're written and as intended too in unconventional ways.
That it really informed
And
like how a great deal of us how I as I even interpreted with it.
and yet as a GM was very rigid and inflexible.
Which was bizarre to say the least, considering that his characters were the most off the wall, off the cuff, like honestly, the ones that you would never expect.
And I think, and in this particular case, and I'm going to generalize grossly here to make presumptions about a lot of GMs who end up with that kind of adversarial uh, relationship with their players. I don't think it's coming in most cases from a place of saying it is me
Yeah,
versus the
I wouldn't say it
players.
comes from a
I
place
think
of malice.
it comes from a place of having an idea, being very much in love with the story that you want to tell. This is my premise, and this is the story that I want to tell, and it's going to be awesome, and I want to lead them to point X. And having a either consciously or unconsciously having a set idea of
Timing, setting, and
how
how
you
they get
want
there.
them to get there, and also sometimes not necessarily setting the expectations properly so that there isn't a meeting of the minds between the GM and the players as to those kinds of things, what's going to be happening in the
I
game.
believe, like, yeah, when I
Um,
first discussed this individual that we are discussing, I wanted to play a sort of a magician, sort of trickster character. I quickly revised and on the fly made up a brand new character when I learned what the campaign was about.
but did somebody ever let you play that magician trickster character,
Yes.
Nick?
Because yes, it for that scenario, it just harkens back to the whole the GM has to realize that he's not in control to the extent that he thinks he is. It's that whole
Again, because
yes, you've
that's why I
made the
was saying about the
story, you've
pros.
made the
Yeah.
destination. You have to be flexible on how your players get there.
There has to be some give and
Exactly.
take.
As I
Um,
said, it's a collaborative
and
storytelling medium.
and that's the kind of thing every RPG YouTuber and podcast out there these days will tell you the importance of a session zero.
And it may
And
seem like a
that's
meme,
where
but
you
it is
establish.
true. It is.
It's very much true. If you don't have that, then there's just less chance of your campaign going successfully.
The risk becomes
And
heavy, more heavy. There's always risk that if it just doesn't click with them, and they say like the end of the first session, like I'm not into it. Session zero
and
helps you
that's
get
where
to like that first session, like, and
and it helps establish that meeting of the minds that's so important. Um, you know, I I know for a fact, I know that that campaign that we're referring to didn't have a session zero. We all came into session one with the premise in mind and having characters ready to
and
go.
assuming that we're
And
going to be
if
playing with them as a player, seeing how
and
they seeing that just them on the opposite side of the DM screen.
yeah, and it was a great premise. And one of these days, one of the other players and I in that campaign have that GM's blessing to continue that storyline. And we've been talking on and off for years about how we want to do that. One of these days, we're actually going to do it. We're going to do a quote unquote season two
Yeah.
That'd be
of
cool.
that campaign with the GM's blessing.
Yeah. And
The problem is we both had characters that we enjoyed
That's
playing.
true.
And well, now if we're on the other side of the screen, then it becomes the dreaded GM
And
PC.
ultimately, I enjoyed the premise, but not enough for me to adopt it. So I didn't even ask permission to continue with
yeah.
blessing for that.
We did.
But that's another thing I didn't expect when I became a GM. I didn't expect the joy I got over creating my world, kind of creating my own premise, either in an established universe or in a new universe, and just going with it. I never realized how joyful it made me, how quickly I would get invested in it. Like there was one time when I was making my cyberpunk city, I chose just the city next to me, Dallas, and I was like, okay, how am I going to make this? I found this map of Dallas and like separated with different symbols, and I was like, okay, those can be my districts, and this will be this, that, 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 and I looked at the clock and I was like, whoa, I've been here 5 hours already, and it didn't feel like 5 hours.
The
Uh, that's
the,
me.
the
Yeah,
number
that's me
of
when I was in as
yep.
as an aspiring creative writer. I'd be like, "This is awesome. I have no idea how I'm gonna put this world to work." And then when I became a GM, I was like, "This is awesome. I've made this cool world and concepts. Like, I really hope people want to play in it."
Yeah, because I never considered
Yeah,
myself the creative type. I never thought about writing anything or writing a. I wasn't in that creative writing mindset, but with these campaigns and being a GM, I realized I do have a creative bone in me. It might not be directed towards writing an actual story or novel, but making these campaigns, making these worlds, these stories,
For people to explore. It's like that's that fits.
and yeah,
and And that's my favorite part of GMing. I have fallen down that rabbit hole of time many times myself. I'll be up on a work night and suddenly I'll have an idea for something and I'm there at the computer and tap 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 and look up. It's 10:30. I should probably start wrapping up soon because I got to be up for work in the morning. Let me just finish
Like
this
I'd have
idea. Tap
like
tap tap tap
Yeah.
seven
tap tap.
different
Oh,
different notes and like 20 different tabs open on my browser
and
and like and
Oh,
especially
it's
I've
like
I've used Google Drive far more now than whenever I was in school or
save
college.
here. It's like
and,
I was like,
and I, especially during COVID, the number of times that I went to bed at like 2:30 in the morning because I was like, okay, I'm sleeping an hour later than when I'm in the office. So and no one can see how tired I am. So okay, okay, I'm done for the night. I'm going to bed. It's 2:30 and I'm going to be awake in about, 4 hours, 4 or
and
5
there's something to be
hours.
said about like the rise of and sort of popularity of a lot of things like this in the post COVID era. That sounds that's it's still so soon and it still feels weird to talk about. Like
Yeah, I mean,
I
well,
had to learn out of for people who don't know me personally, I am terrible with technology to the point it's possibly a
what?
curse.
What? I don't know what you're talking about, Nick.
But in order to keep the games going and the games that Robert joined in on us with, I basically had to like learn how to run games online.
Oh yeah. And I've definitely had to learn how to juggle my time when it comes to multiple campaigns. I mean, I only have two, and it feels like a lot of work. I don't know how you do with multiple games, Nick.
Well, I'm not.
Well, you have 2.5
Yeah,
True,
because you
two and a
co-GM
half.
with
True, two
Nick,
and a half. I'll give that.
and I would never call myself a role model. It's
and
not healthy
I've got two
distribution
and
of
a half
time.
as well.
Yeah,
I've got 2.5 as well. Um, and you, it's it can be a time sink, but it's the best kind of time sink because it's one that you're
but that's
enjoying.
also where circling back to the anxiety. That's where the anxiety comes from. You feel so good and like it's like that big serotonin hit of like it's all fitting together. The story, but you have to risk it because like, going against back to the biggest thing about a GM, you don't control the players.
And I can't tell you how thrilled that I am that all of you are so far, we're only what, 2, 3 sessions in, digging my Walking Dead campaign.
Oh, we're we're loving that.
And that just a nice little segue into the topic of inspiration that's that just came from talking to the owner of a local game store and he mentioned a premise of a Walking Dead game that he was going to be running in the store. And I was like, oh, I like that. Do you mind if I steal that? Because your way of running games and where you're going to take this game is completely different from where I would take it and where my group of players would take it. Do you mind if I blatantly steal your premise? And he's like, oh, go right ahead. And so I'll occasionally see posts on the store's social media when they run sessions of that. And I'm like, oh, yeah, we're going in two completely different directions, starting from the same starting
And
point.
that's a good thing both for every creative writer and every like future GM. Don't be afraid to tell the same story because every story has been told except for your version.
Oh
And
yeah,
in this
definitely.
case, your player's version.
Yeah, what's that saying? There are no original ideas anymore.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
we
And
ran out of ideas before antiquity ended,
pretty much.
but we keep telling different
that were
stories because someone has a different
that are
idea.
all variations on the same
Yeah, that's why
themes.
there's a website called TV Tropes that just tracks every single trope or cliche you could ever imagine.
And then of course, there's the other kind of inspiration, somebody making an offhand comment. My other campaign that I run solo, my Star Wars campaign about the Star Wars rock band. It it comes from two sources. It comes from my wife having watched Star Wars Visions and the episode Tatooine Rhapsody and saying, "I want to be a Hut rock star in some game." And that kind of got filed away in the back of both of our heads because, like, how's that ever going to come up in a campaign? It's a great NPC idea, but how's that ever going to come up in a campaign? And then I was reading Bono's memoir, the lead singer of U2, and he was talking about, especially after the band got big, traveling the world for humanitarian reasons. I was like, you've got a rock band trying to make it big, traveling the galaxy, but they're doing work for the rebellion. I have a campaign idea.
Again,
Yeah,
without being specific, we can go into like a little bit about what sparked our starting of our current joint campaign, Robert.
that's you were reading my mind because I was about to say that as well. Because yeah, it was just a day. I think
It
there
was
was
supposed to be
supposed,
it was supposed to be one of the many alien days that
yeah,
didn't happen, of
and
which
I
there was
was the
three
only
of
one that
them.
came over, so we were like, we definitely can't just run it with just me here. So we were like, we can just sit around, talk a little bit,
Chewing,
and then
chewing in the wind.
one thing led to another. We just saw something Star Wars related, and then I noticed something. And I was like, "Hey Nick, do you see that? Do you notice this?" And it's like, "Huh."
And I looked at it at this one object. I was like, wait.
And
And
I
I
was like,
started pulling out other books to be like, is this consistent? Like,
"Yeah." I
is
was
this
like,
consistent?
Is this a just a happy accident, or did George Lucas plan this, or did the person who
It's
made this plan this?"
like, I started pulling up, so I was like, is anyone seeing this? It's like getting no results. It's like, but it has to be something. It's just, it was lining up too well to be a coincidence, but apparently it was just pure coincidence.
Yeah, and we were just like,
What if
"Well,
it
we
was?
know the usual premise of Star Wars: it's this, and this. What if we did this instead?" And
And
that
then it
spawned
just
what we're
started,
doing now.
like, sort of this, just hitting like, because again, like, we took an established universe and found something that was intriguing. 'Cause human beings pattern recognition. Look it up. It's like
Yeah,
we recognize a pattern that didn't seem to like match up with anything, nor what's been spoken about or even thought about. And then we were like, okay, and we admitted that pattern recognition is a thing.
and we were like, "But we can use it." And then,
But what if it wasn't? What if we use that as inspiration?
yeah, what if we use it as maturation? What if we did this, and this? We know we're going to float this idea. We have an idea of who's going to join. We know, like Daryl said, we kind of know how our players think. So we're like, okay, we do this, and this. And well, lo and behold, in December, we just finished Act One. The Our kind of villain character died, and I'm sad, and they're sad that she's gone. But we were like, but then both Nick and I are joyful because they were like, now we can get into it.
Like, and again, it was spur of the moment, complete like I've owned these books for years. They're well worn, some of them are falling apart. And it's like I never noticed it. It's just you noticing it and I noticing that you noticed. And it's like you never know when inspiration will strike.
Yes, and if I had a nickel for every time Nick and I got an idea from an alien campaign that didn't happen that day, I'd have 2 nickels, which isn't a lot, but it's strange that it's happened twice.
Hmm.
Well, and so now you have fully embraced GMing.
Oh, yes, very much so. I mean, I
And
just got
And you
into
enjoy
and
it.
yeah, and I'll not really a spoiler because 'cause I've said about this before, but I'm definitely got into the, uh, Legend of the Five Rings, all that Rokugan setting stuff, and I'm
Uh-huh.
just like, I definitely wanna make something like this because 1, it's a system I think all 3 of us know about, but we've never really
Ever,
played in it.
yeah. And it's a setting that I've always been interested in, but
Yeah, it's
never.
got so much it's like Star Wars, it's got a whole lot of lore, these have got books, card games, I think short
It's
stories as well, and it's just like,
yeah,
I could
and I've
do
always been
something
to
with
like that sort
this.
of east eastern sort of samurai aesthetic stuff like that, but never really got into it.
It's like and yeah, I like Japan, I definitely like the whole Seki Sengoku Jidai period, which is basically what
Yeah,
Rokugan is based off, only it's like, what if that never ended? And then
it's like it has a whole lot more
yeah,
going for it, but it's always been like I've wanted. I've never wanted to run it, but I've always wanted to play in something like that.
yeah, and
same,
It's just like
exactly the
it's
same.
again, it's just sort of my sensibilities. Is like I don't think I could do it justice. I maybe I could one day, but maybe I after seeing you run it, I could try running
yeah,
one day.
because I'm
But
definitely not gonna try to incorporate everything, I'm just gonna say, "Okay, this is how the world works. I'm gonna introduce this that's still part of the world. I'm gonna introduce this in here, then we'll make our characters and see just how they react to this situation, this era that I'm gonna put in."
that is another fine point as well.
Because yeah, the same
Not
guy you
everything
got
has
your
to
Walking
exist.
Dead idea from, Daryl. He also talked about
Hmm.
Rokugan when I was in the store once, and he's like, "Yeah, I run it as well, but I'm not big on the whole magic side of it, so I pretty much made Rokugan without the magic. So it's basically just samurai in Japan." So
What? He didn't want to run magic? The devil, you say?
no, he was like, that their type of magic. I don't really think I could do it, or I just didn't want to do it because it's a whole lot of stuff. And then
Well, and I mean to be fair too, for our listeners out there, nice little store that the reason it exists in the first place is the owner wanted someplace where wanted a game store where there's a gaming space that is not dominated by D&D. And so he does not carry D&D, he does not run D&D, he doesn't really carry any fantasy stuff at all. So, I'm not surprised that he didn't want to run any magic in it. What I've seen is that he just from looking around in the store, he doesn't carry Legend of the Five Rings, but he carries the 5e
Yeah,
variant Adventures in
yeah.
Rokugan.
And again, that's another thing to think about. Like, you don't have to run these things exactly to the letter.
No.
All role playing games, your table is your table, be it at a in the back room of a Starbucks, at a gaming shop, or in your own home.
yes,
You can choose to
I wish
emphasize what you want, and also, no matter how large the world is, you have to accept that you can't give them the whole world.
exactly,
I'm running an Everon campaign in the our D&D campaign in the world of Everon. I can, even if this campaign ran for like 4 more years, they wouldn't touch all of it.
exactly. And same with
And
Star Wars. I got them all in this
yeah.
huge galaxy with all these planets. Some of which are just there. No one's ever done anything with them. So there's like hundreds of planets. We could just make up whatever the heck I want for each planet.
it's a galaxy far, far away. There's billions of planets likely.
Yeah, and there's people talk in Star Wars and to a lesser degree Star Trek about small galaxy syndrome, about how most of the stories in the main media are centered around such a small group of people and
But guess what?
places.
That's
Like,
because they have to attract viewers
right,
and people that understand that.
exactly,
Guess what's guess what you
exactly.
aren't
And so
constrained by as a GM,
yes, you have no budget. You're not trying to appeal to millions and millions of
and to be
fans. You're
honest,
appealing
uh,
to
stock investors.
you're appealing to half a dozen or so people who come over to your whatever location you play in on a semi-regular basis to have fun together telling this
And it's a little
story.
bit of your preferences too. Like, how many times have we three said, okay, we're going to play something in Star Wars, but we're not going to go to Tatooine? I'm sick of Tatooine.
Yeah, yeah. I'm spoiler alert. Since you're not a player, it doesn't matter as much to you, Robert. But Nick, cover your ears.
Okay.
At some point, Rebel Yell, the rock band campaign, may go to Tatooine just to run into the characters that were partial inspiration
Okay.
from the Tatooine
Yeah, I get it.
Rhapsody episode of Visions, because they that particular episode isn't there's nothing in it that would necessarily preclude it from fitting into a more quote unquote canonical Star Wars. But, it would just be fun. It would be for the fun of it, not to say like, oh, it's Star Wars. We have to go to Tatooine. Or, who knows? Maybe that band got off at Tatooine and they'll run into him someplace else. I don't know. It's just a thought that occurred to me when I was rewatching that episode a few weeks ago. It's not fleshed out yet because that's down the line somewhere.
But yeah.
So, what kind of prep have you started doing making that transition from player to GM, Robert? What kind of prep do
I
you
can come
do?
back now.
Yes, you can come
Yes, you can
back.
come back
But for
now.
that, with the Star Wars one first, it was like, okay, it's definitely first. I want to play it in Star Wars. Okay. What setting is it going to be? Okay, it's the Warlord era. It's like, okay, what do I know about that era? The players, the events happening. What do I know about it? Okay. Now, in this huge, expansive galaxy, where do I want them to be? And I was like, okay, I want them to be here, next to this Warlord faction and this Warlord faction and this New Republic fleet. Okay. Now, as players, how first am I going to hook them in? And then what is the kind of end goal or the objective I'm making this campaign out to be? And for this one, it was first, it was a sandbox, but I'm learning that maybe I shouldn't have started out with a sandbox because I am kind of running out how to direct them of where to go. So I think I'm going to try and shrink it down to not a linear campaign, but still there's an end goal. It's not just live in the galaxy. And then I was like, okay, how are they going to meet each other? Like, how would these like disproportionate people just meet each other? So like, okay. In this scenario, I was like, okay, it's not going to be they meet in a tavern. It's going to be they're in prison together. So, and they're going to this world to do manual labor, but circumstances get them out, and then they just law of survival. You just stick together, and then
And again, there's nothing against the classic and the less classic but similar. We start in a tavern or we start in prison. Both are classic tropes, and people like to, even in the
exactly,
writing community, say that tropes are bad. Like, no, no, tropes aren't bad. They can be bad when they're used as like heavy-handed crutches.
exactly. And then I was like, okay, they met together, and what I wanted with my first world, I wanted to be a microcosm of the wider scenario in the galaxy. So this world, there's factions vying for control, just like in the broader galaxy, there are factions vying for control.
I think I described it to you as like it's the starting location of like an MMORPG. Like
Exactly. It's
you get the the initial interactions of like groups and factions and the idea that there's a wider world, but then once they get off, like that's when they realize Oh, this is way deeper than just the
Yeah.
surface level of a planet.
And this way, it also gave my players times to kind of get what their character was going to be. Like, one character is definitely just a brawler. The other one's kind of that smuggler cliche. Another's a smooth talking kind of spy like character. And then another's a mix between a shooter and a talker. And then they kind of figured out what they were going to play as. Then they get off the planet, they're in the wider galaxy, and I've already set up like these, at least the big players in the galaxy. And they're like, okay, then you're going to go over here. You're going to be helped by these allied NPCs who you've grown to care for, and they've grown to care for you during that microcosm on the planet. Then here's the galaxy. I've laid out some antagonists that they're going to meet along the way, and kind of just realize, okay, they're here. They're going to go maybe here, here, and here because they, like any aspiring people, they need money, so they got to do jobs.
I
And
mean,
through those jobs, they're going to find these plot points, plot hooks, which will go over here, here, and here. And from then on, that was my campaign.
and one of the earliest things that you should know is always give characters incentive,
Yes,
and usually that comes in the form of the currency.
yes.
They're starting with less. They
And then
need more.
and then with my, at least with the starting plan, I was like, okay, first thing is I need them to stay on this planet. And I was like, okay, how do I not let them leave? So I was like,
Go-
there's going to be a shield around the planet because this is a resource rich world that the previous empire was like, this is important, so we don't want anyone just getting in or out. So I was like, okay, then I'm going to have the current ruler of this planet using that to his advantage. Like, there's a dangerous people on the planet and coming in, so I've quarantined the planet. You can't get out. And I was like, okay, your player's goals, like I was new, find a ship and leave the planet. And to do that, you might have to topple a government. So you better get to it.
Again, that's a strong. It's a very strong hook. But I
Yeah.
would like to talk about like the
Very
perils of
much.
being a
Very much
GM.
so.
Oh yes, very much so.
Specifically, I'll stick to
Yes.
my peril that I've encountered. The campaign just
And what is that
fizzles
peril?
out. And I think I know which one you think. I think you know which one I'm talking about.
It sounds like you're expecting your players to
Mm-hmm.
form some kind of uprising, Nick. I mean that can
It can,
happen
and
to the
I
best of
put a lot of effort
campaigns
into
too.
it, and the two times that I've attempted to do it.
And a lot of that comes down to there
Yeah.
cliches can be cliches for a reason. And as we enter adulthood and have to adult daily, like we all do, it can become tougher to make that time commitment that we've mentioned earlier on both
Yes,
sides
definitely.
of the screen. Um, I mean, the little bit of real world example, the past few weeks trying to schedule stuff among all of us, I've had to say like, oh well, we're not available because we have this family commitment that the first week got pushed to the week after, which got pushed to this morning, and spoiler alert,
Oh
it has
wow.
been pushed back to post holidays now. So because a third party involved in this woke up this morning and was ill, so it's been pushed back again. So that kind of thing, it's an unfortunate fact of life, and impacts
Yes, definitely.
it impacts games. Um, because
We all
at
want
the
to
end of
have
the day,
fun.
as we love these games, as much as we love these games, that's what they are,
Like
and sometimes
there's
something
some
has to take
weekends that like
precedence. And
I've
so
run games for pretty consistently for a long period of time, and even I despite loving it, this is my favorite thing to do. I sometimes am like,
Yeah,
I need a need a day or two, a weekend off.
Yeah, and
I
it's
need a
not
mental
just
health
us.
day. I need a
There's
me
also
day.
where players are just like, either I'm burnt out or I got something to do or I just need a day to myself as well.
And that's it. That's
Yeah,
something
and
that GMs especially have to recognize and also accept, and players have to. It's an equal thing that you have to both understand each other.
yeah, and sometimes it just happens that you may have a particular game idea that you really like, and you have put a lot of work into building that campaign idea, and for whatever reason,
It's
through no
just not
fault of
clicking.
anyone's, yeah, it
I think you
doesn't
know the one that I'm
click
referring
for
to.
the players. Yeah, yeah, it just doesn't gel.
It
And
happens. It's
that's
not
not a
every story is
it
going to
happens.
land. Not every setting, even if it is a established setting, is going to that others work with. It's like
Yeah,
I'm stubborn, so I am holding on to it. But maybe I'll work with maybe I'll write it out for someone and someone else can do it and they have like the right conditions to make it work.
Yeah, and another pitfall, at least one I've realized, at least about myself personally, is that sometimes there's a campaign I'm running, players are liking it, but either A, it's not gelling with me personally anymore, or the other is I found a new setting or a new campaign that I really want to do, and I want to scrap this old campaign and do that one instead.
And that's also
yeah, because
befitting of
your
a
time is
new
limited.
GM. Like that's probably like one of the bigger hurdles for a new GM is like you've tasted how good it is to make worlds and campaigns, and that's a good feeling. And it's kind of like a hit, like like an addiction. It's like you want that new feeling.
Yeah, or at least for me, it was just like the campaign I dropped to do the Cyberpunk campaign. I was like, yeah, it's fun and they're doing fun. It's just I don't have as much desire to do it anymore. It's like it was
You're not
invested, it
as
was okay
invested
for a
in it.
while, but then I was like, down the road, I know
Did you have more
compared to
enjoyment?
Cyberpunk, I don't want to do this more than Cyberpunk. So it's like I'm not gonna
Yeah,
delay or put it on a hiatus
Or,
because I know I'm just not gonna come back to it.
or, or sometimes it happens that you're like, I have this idea. I love this idea. The players love the idea. Everyone has fun. You get a few sessions in, and you're like,
Yes,
I have
and
no
like
place else to
that's
you
a
go
have
with
danger
this.
I'm getting with my As of an Empire. It's a campaign sometimes, and I know my players are invested, and I'm still invested. That's why I'm trying to make the transition from okay, I made this as a sandbox. Now I need to condense it into a more uh, elliptical campaign.
and hey, for you to know, you
I
still have us.
you
We kind of know the Star Lore a little bit,
yeah, and
Exactly.
so that we could give you some help with that.
we you're in a place where you've decided that you need to craft
Exactly.
more
I
of
need
a
a
story
story
than a
instead
setting
of a
for that
setting.
one.
Because
But the
when
advantage
I did
now is
my
you have,
world,
yeah.
when I did my like you said, my MMO start, I had the world, but I had more of a story for that. Once
But
we
you
got
have
off
the
that
advantage
planet,
now.
yeah, once we got off that planet in the wider galaxy, I didn't really have that anymore. I just
You
had the
have,
setting.
and that's an important part that we can maybe get into
And
like more in detail in like campaign planning.
Yes.
yeah, we there's a whole at
But
least
I will
one
say that at least
entire
to give you
episode
some
into
advice while during
campaign
this
planning.
podcast to say like you have the players. Look at how they're playing, what their see
Yeah,
their goals or these personalities, and I can help really influence where you go beyond your initial first sketches.
yeah. And that's one thing that I have found when I'm coming up with a new story or campaign is I sit down and I try to think to myself. I ran into that same kind of thing with a campaign that fizzled out. It was a Star Wars campaign. It was a great hook. It was a great idea. The players came up with great characters, and we didn't even reach the first endpoint that I came up to because s- the
Yes.
dreaded cliche of schedules kind of made it fizzle out. But in retrospect, looking back at it, even though it was intended and pitched to them all as a long running campaign, I didn't have any place that I knew to take it
Yeah.
after
And
reaching
with
that first endpoint. So it's something that when I sit down now and come up with a new setting or campaign, I'm like, okay, would this be better served as a
Which is
limited
something that you and
campaign
I have
or an
discussed
ongoing
before with
campaign?
Legacy. It's like
And that
we've always taken into account like
exactly.
character action and like that's always again, it's a you're building this story together, whether or not the players are actively telling you this is what my character wants to do,
Yes, and
or
I
you
think
inferring like, okay, what would this character like to encounter, or what would make it more sense for them to encounter? What would challenge them?
exactly, and I think Legacy has helped me realize, at least with my other campaign, it's like with Legacy, we knew off the get back this was a fleshed out campaign. There was an end point. There was going to be no lollygagging, no going around doing other stuff. This was the campaign. We got it
But
all
what
set
helps
out.
it is seeing how the characters react to everything and sort of
Exactly.
catering to that. That's that's sort of been my mentor lesson to you on that. It's like, yes, you can have a blessed out campaign. You can have all the details written out. But you want players to want to be a part
and
of it and
a good
cater to the players at points so that they are constantly back in. You never know which one of them is gonna like or multiple of them are gonna be brought in.
and a good example of this kind of concept from other media
Yes.
is HBO's Watchmen series because it was highly successful. And HBO went to Damon Lindelof, the showrunner, and said, "We want another season." And he turned around and said, "We
He said
told our
he'd
story.
tell another story if he had another story.
We yeah, we don't have another story. We put everything on the screen. Everything that we had to say is there. And
Until they
there is
come
no
up with
season
a
2."
story for season two.
And so that's the kind of thing that I've sat down when I'm coming up before I even tell anybody, "Hey, I have this idea. Would anybody be interested in playing it?" I sit down and I try to think, okay, is th- does this lend itself to ongoing or limited? Um, my for the listeners out there, I did a limited Star Wars campaign that was loosely
Yes.
based on Les Miserables. I had been trying to crack doing a Les Mis Star Wars for years,
Wasn't
and I
it?
forget what it was that
Wasn't it
finally
one of the
made
aftermath
it all
novels?
click for me. Well, no, it wasn't one of the aftermath
Oh yeah,
novels
you did use it for
themselves.
most.
Think I think I saw someone online mention um like setting a campaign on
I think it.
Coruscant. like during
I
the
think you showed
aftermath
me that because
novels
there was
right
like a
after
GIF
Return of the
of like
Jedi.
the Palpatine statue being knocked over.
Yeah, and I was like, "That's it. That's my Les Miserables." Return of the Jedi is the French Revolution in Les Mis, and the
Gives you the
aftermath
framework.
storyline up to the liberation of Coruscant is my framework, and that's my end point. And I sat down and I mapped it out, and I was like, granted, real time wise, it took over a year. My plan was to for it to be a 1 year campaign with a session each month. Scheduling made it go longer, but the same concept applied. It was 12 parts. I mapped it out to 12
And
parts, and that was it. There's nothing past that. You guys may decide to revisit some of those characters in
but
the
it
future,
was really
but it
fun,
won't
and
be
like
that campaign.
I did a similar idea. Like I did Dark Forces, but instead of Kyle Katarn as popular Star Wars character from Legends, who did all these events in this video game from the 90s. Very popular, very good. You can buy it on Steam. But
Okay.
but basically went through this the whole of that story of that game, but broke it up into a group of characters. Went through all the similar beats except for they skipped one
And
level out of clever intelligence.
That's a story for later.
that'll be an RPG glory story.
Yes.
From a certain point of view.
But uh, and another lesson that I had to learn becoming a GM was, unless an element is essential to the story,
Yes, exactly.
don't hold it too
And
precious.
that's one that's you constantly have
Don't
to
hold
learn.
it too
It's
tightly.
like I've held like concepts and ideas of like, "Oh, I wish it could have gone A through D ways, but it's always ended up like I knew what they were gonna do secret ops in W.
Yeah. And I'll say my recent one.
and I still apologize to you for that, Nick. We'll tell that story on
Yeah,
Yeah.
we'll tell that whole story on
I'll
an
say the
episode
recent
sometime,
one
but I
for me,
apologize.
and Nick, you can chime in as well since it's about legacy. Is I really loved our villain character, Allegria. She
Same
was.
here.
I loved
Uh,
playing her. I loved being pretending to
it,
be
it, it
her,
was our
talking to
it
the
was our
players.
it was our first it was our first we worked on the character workshop together on that. You just came up with that amazing performance for it.
And then, but we
Because
always
originally
knew.
I originally thought I was gonna be the one playing it, but like the minute you
Yeah,
found the voice, like instantly, and I was okay. Like, okay, you got it.
yeah. I guess personally, I've always wanted to play a character with her type of personality because I know in real life it'd be something you really don't want to do, but in a game, yeah, it's perfect.
Yeah,
But then we knew at the end she was going to die. And then at the beginning, I was like, okay, fine, she's a character, a device. But once I started playing her, I was like, oh, we're getting to that point.
and
I won't
I
be
was
able to
feeling the
play her
same way
anymore.
because I was like, 'cause even though you were doing the roles for her, it's like I was also like, but that's like that's how we know it's like one of the greats, one of
Yeah,
the big perform. This is gonna stick with them
yeah. And I
because
hope it did
we
since,
and if not, it will stick between us because that was our thing. And it's like
yeah, and
it
we can ask you, Daryl. Will Allegria stick with you? Did we do her justice?
Oh yeah, she was a lot of fun. I regret that my first postponed family commitment meant that I had to miss her final session.
Yeah, but you'll have more moments.
there'll be
I
more moments with
I
because
regret
we.
that.
I'm pretty sure we're gonna feel the same way with what we have in store for
Oh
the
yeah, because
future.
we were like, well, she's gone, but now we have the chance to make others.
Yes. Now, another thing that you have to learn coming in as a GM, and w- being part of our group, you were probably better prepared for this than some other new GMs might have been. But you have to be prepared for
Oh,
players
very much so.
zigging when you
I
There,
expect them to
honestly,
zag.
that is a GM skill that is can never be taught. It must be learned.
As a player who has zigged and zagged in your campaigns,
Yes.
I knew once I started being a GM, getting these same type of players, I knew what I had to expect and what I had to let go internally. Like, they aren't going to follow your prompts, Robert.
Like,
You just got to go with it.
I had a friend in high school who taught me this lesson. We'll call him C. But his whole thing was like, okay, here's the concept of the story, and everyone's like, oh, I'm the big warrior hero. It's like I'm adventurer. I'm the sneaky rogue, and it's like, are there shrooms around? Can I eat them? What? There's an NPC around. Uh, can I steal? Can I steal his pantaloons? It's like deliberately like the most nonsensical, non-essential task. It's like, oh, we're meeting with the king. Can I stab him?
Yeah.
And it's like, as much as that frustrated me, but I also recognize like, there's no one wrong way to role play.
Yeah, and with our
But I was
D&D
like,
game at least, we were like, I'm sure you eventually realized this, like once you gave us that quest, we were like, no, we ain't gonna do it that way.
oh,
we'll
again,
we'll do,
that's
we'll do the quest, but we won't do the quest. We're gonna
having
do it our
gone
way.
through someone who
We're gonna
literally
do it
been
our
through
way.
like every single quest with everyone being like completely on board and playing their characters, even if I made them for them, and him be like, character seat? I don't care about that. I'll just look at the stats. And also had ungodly like he'd roll 20s right in front of me and be like over and over again on the most absurd things.
Now, as a once you got your feet wet as a GM, I'll say Nick and I, but we know it was mostly me. What did I rope the two of you into doing a short time into your term as a new
Drove
GM,
me into
Robert?
doing.
The two
Oh,
of
you
Yes.
you,
had us. Yeah,
a
we had to
convention
do that.
game,
Our little Lord of the Rings game.
a a a three-part
And I've only
successive
ever played in convention
convention
games.
game.
And only
and,
once.
and that's the first time I've ever played with complete strangers in that type of way.
I I had run one
I had
convention
played
game
one
the year
in
before, but
2019
This was my first.
at Star Wars Celebration, but it was a system that I knew.
and so what was your experience prepping for and running a convention game as
Well, I'll go
a
first as
relatively
the
fresh GM?
second most relative GM. I was kind of scared. It's like I'm used to running for time, like long period, like times and breaks for everyone, stuff like that. So I was not sure I could handle a time limit and tell, give the experience like I'm used to. Didn't help that I also got ill during part of the event either.
But what about you, Robert? What was your experience
Well, with a
running a
convention,
convention
it's
game?
at least with GMA, it's a little different because you have a limited period of time, so you do know with these campaigns there is a set linear campaign, so you do have to do a little bit of railroading because you need to get through it. You can't have a lot of distractions. But for me, the
But it is
biggest thing,
accepted because
exactly.
everyone else understands that.
But what I had to can reconcile is that I don't know these people. I have no idea how they're going to act. I have no idea what they're going to do. I had a little bit of fortune because you and Nick knew some of these people, so you at least could tell me kind of what they're doing since you went first, Daryl. Can you like these people are going to come back and this is how they reacted to this and this
And
and that.
also, thank you for telling me what you experienced because he helped me get
Yeah.
home when I was not feeling well.
So yeah, that was a good thing. But it was like, yeah, I'm doing this. I don't know these people. Don't know what they're going to do. I just have to roll with it. And if we and we also had the time constraints. So if time goes a little too long, I'm going to have to shorten some things. And then the last thing I had to reconcile was just some players just get bad rolls for some of the most mundane things
Yeah.
over and over again, and you just have to go with it. It's like, okay, I just needed you to run through a battlefield. You keep tripping.
Remember the boat on Whisper Base.
Ugh.
The boat. We'll get to that one. That's a fun one.
But it's like, yeah, I was not expecting this
Th-
to be your hurdle. But even so, I had a lot of fun. I even one of the players even basically had a session nemesis because this guy kept showing up, pretty much beat the tar out of him the first time, but the second time he was able to win. So that was good at the end. But it was like I don't. My biggest hurdle was I don't know these people, and I just have to improv with what they do.
Yeah. I had run one the year before that, despite having thinking I had everything timed down nicely, I had to speed run through like the last 30 minutes of the block. But um, both of you in particular, I know from hanging around and talking to some of the people at the convention, they loved both of your
I
sessions.
was I was incredibly surprised
I
because
know, I know,
again I wasn't feeling well and I came in just out of not feeling well.
and I know for a fact that one of the people who was in my session as part one and Roberts as part two wasn't signed up for Nick's part three, but a friend of his was, and let him have his place in part three
Wait,
because he had had
really?
so much fun in parts one and two.
Like
Uh,
again, I was not in the best.
Yes.
I probably shouldn't have come there. I was not in the best of shape. It's like I paid the money to be there and do
yeah,
the event.
that is one thing we didn't really have a planned contingency if one of us had a problem. So me and Daryl kind of scrambled, like,
Oh,
okay, if he doesn't show, is it going to be
my
me? Is it going
problem
to be you?
my problem was like a literal one in 1,000 chance.
Yeah,
According to my dermatologist, it was like she's like I've never seen it done twice. It's like yeah, I wish it wasn't happening right now.
But
But apparently, I put on
we
a show.
you yeah, there there was definite positive feedback, and we mentioned in our previous episode Robert's house rule of in the Star Wars system, which is what this was in. Uh, if the Destiny pool goes all dark side, you're able to flip
Oh, that's why
all of
he. That's
them
why he
and
gave the
have
advice to
something
all of them because he thought I was
grand
gonna do the
happen.
same thing.
Yeah,
Because they were worried about that.
and I I I mentioned it in my part one, and several of the players were like, "Oh,
So
that's
I know who was the
cool,"
one that went through all three.
and we're talking about adopting it for their games.
yeah. And then, like we said
So,
last episode, that was also the first time I got questions. Oh, cool. Where's your podcast located? Can we listen to it? I'm like, we don't have one right now. But it's like it's here now.
well,
We're right
well,
here.
now we
The
do.
podcast is real. It manifested.
So we've been we've been yapping on for a while about the transition from player to GM. Is there any part of it that we haven't touched
I would
on
say the
that
big
either
one
of you wants
that you got to
to?
learn, everyone's got to learn this, is that at a GM, you're going to discover your strengths, your weaknesses, and your limits, and you need to know which ones. Like for me, I've been told, I've realized, you've all told me, I'm great at making fights, structuring boss fights, structuring fights, little weak on the story. But I also need to learn my limits. Like right now, I should focus on like campaigns with an endpoint instead of just having a setting and letting them go wild. That's a limit I've discovered, and I got to go with it. I want to keep doing my strength in making boss fights,
which are great.
and I need to work on my and I need to just work on my
They
weaknesses of
are.
making that story more cohesive and
Sandboxes
better.
are hard. They're very hard. The
Exactly.
smaller the sandbox, the better.
Yes. So that's what I've had to learn and what everyone has to learn. Know your strengths, know your weaknesses. Don't be afraid to ask your players what was good, what was bad, what do you think I need to
Oh,
work
that's
on?
in general, yeah. But as for me, I've had to learn like not every idea is gonna hit. At least with the current group of players, or maybe never this group of players. And for my limit, I know
Yeah,
that
and I've just
I can't run as many campaigns as I used to, both because, well, it's a lot and it delineates the quality, but
Yeah.
also that I have others to pick up in the schedule.
my biggest lesson that I've had to learn for myself going from excuse me, player to GM is finding the happy medium of over preparation and under preparation. There you I don't want to script everything out like I did in the old days. And while there is something to be said occasionally for just walking into a session saying, okay, here's the situation I'm going to drop my players in, and everything I do is going to just depend on what they do and fly by the seat of my pants. You can't do a whole
Yeah.
campaign that
That can
way.
be session by session, but like
You
I
can't.
think that the only sessions that I've like dialed in
Yeah, I mean,
heavily on like what I want to do has been like anything involving like horror, like Alien or Delta Green. Like
Yes.
those are specific points that I need to hit, and I make certain I think about the players and
yeah.
how they'll react, but mostly on like when's the scare, when's the jump, when's the hit.
Yeah. And then there's another lesson, both for this and just for life in general, is that don't set expectations for your to your players or to yourself that you know can't be met.
We aren't all Matt
Right.
Mercer. We aren't all
Exactly. And then
And we
we aren't
shouldn't try to be.
Tolkien. We aren't Stephen King. We're just having fun.
yeah, we're just having fun and we just need to learn don't set expectations or promise something you know you might not be able to deliver. And yes, that's easier to say, harder to do.
It doesn't matter the amount of effort that goes into it. It's your players and you giving even the minimum of effort would be just as great as any other like source of this type of media because you're working together and making a story. One that you can tell to your friends, to someone at a bar, to anyone, and that might inspire them to become players or game masters themselves.
For sure. That's some good stuff that we have covered, guys, and I hope that you out there listening have been able to pull some useful information from it, and that it can help you make that decision to jump from player to GM if it's
And this
something
is
that you
just
kind of have
the
your eye on.
this is kind of just the bare bones.
Yeah,
Yep.
yeah, just a conversation on the kinds of things to expect, to look for, to have in mind as you're making that jump.
And look forward to us including our friend Robert in discussing more of the finer points
Yeah,
Yeah. And I'll
and
just say
details.
for any player watching who thinks about that transition, I'll just say one thing. Don't say you can't do it. Everyone's going to have that anxiety, but you can.
And most CMs have were players themselves.
Yeah. And
exactly.
so never say you aren't creative enough or you don't have what it takes, because
And for game masters who exist currently, extend the olive branch to someone you feel is promising.
Yeah.
exactly.
Well, with that, I just want to thank everybody for joining us for another episode of the How We Roll Gaming podcast.
Thank
You
you for
can,
joining us, Robert.
No
yes,
problem.
indeed.
Always glad to be here.
And you can find information about all of our past episodes in your podcaster of choice or by visiting our website at howwerollgaming.com. At the site, you'll also find information about the games that we can run, our current campaigns, links to How We Roll Gaming's social media, and a link to our Teespring merch store where you can buy show merch to help us produce the podcast. If you have a question you'd like us to answer, a topic you'd like to hear us discuss, or just want to drop us a line, you can email us at podcast@howwerollgaming.com. And we hope that you will join us next time when we discuss adding new players to an existing group.
Very intriguing and a rare occurrence here, but one that's enough to warrant an
Yeah.
episode.
It's happened more recently over the years.
Yeah, yeah. And so we hope you join us for that. And until next time, um, thanks once again for joining us. I'm Daryl,
I'm Nick.
And I'm Robert.
and this is How We Roll.